The Oracl Network. Look deeper.
Good evening, friends. I'm Emma, the host of the True Crime Witch podcast. Join me every other week as we delve into everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. You can find the podcast by searching the True Crime Witch podcast on all of your favourite podcast apps, and search for us on social media just using the True Crime Witch. Hope to see you there. Remember, friends, stay safe and stay spooky.
Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors! Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBT. I'm your host, CJ. I hope everyone's having a good start to 2021. I know we're not free from this fucked up pandemic or the fucked up domestic terrorists called MAGA supporters. However, I'm optimistic by the end of this year, the world as we know it now will be a better place. And at very least, it'll be working towards becoming a better place. Connect with me on Facebook at Beyond the Rainbow Pod, on Instagram at Beyond the Rainbow or Rainbow Crimes 12, and Twitter at Rainbow Crimes. And there's one more way you can connect with me. I love to play Call of Duty on my Xbox One. My username is RainbowCrime839. Well, all the stickers and magnets have been sent out. I'll order more in a month or so and have another giveaway. Thank you to those who participated. Our missing but not forgotten LGBTQ person is Brandy Wesequate. It was early New Year's morning. The year had just changed to 2012. Brandy was seen leaving a house party at the 900 block of Ray Street in Regina, Saskatchewan. Yes, I said Regina, not vagina. Although they do sound similar. That's just the way the city is pronounced. Brandy's family hadn't heard from her in 2 weeks, which to them was a crazy long time. So they went and they filed a missing persons report on January 10th. Brandy is a 28-year-old trans woman. She's 5'10" and weighs approximately 180 pounds. She's described as Aboriginal. She has dyed blonde hair and brown eyes. Brandy also has some tattoos. There's a heart flower, the name Judy, and a native mother and child on her left forearm. Brandy's tongue is also pierced, and she has a birthmark on her left hip. Her last Facebook post was on New Year's Eve 2011. She said,
"Well, putting the face on and gonna ring in the new year with some good friends. Party on, Wayne. Show winning."
If found today, Brandy would be 37, almost 38. She's the eldest of 6 siblings. Any information that might bring Brandy home can please be shared with the Regina Police Department at 306-777-6453. Case number R as in Roger, M as in Mark, 12001537. Her family misses her deeply. Check out her Charlie Project link on my website at beyondtherainbowpodcast.com. I'll put this information in the show notes. It's kind of sad when crime victims become household names. What I mean by that is almost everyone's familiar with John Benet Ramsey, Lacey Peterson, and for the LGBTQ, I think Matthew Shephard is the tragic hate crime memory that pops up into most people's minds. 10 years before Matthew Shephard was murdered by homophobic yeehaws, there was a young man named Gordon Church. Gordon was kidnapped, brutalized, and murdered by 2 parolees who were recently out of prison in Utah. Before diving into Gordon's story, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Utah firsthand. Back in 2011 or 2012, I met a Mormon lesbian online, and she happened to live in Utah. She came to visit me in California, and then I went to visit her in Utah. It's one of those sad stories where I was more into her than she was into me. But that's not really what I wanted to share with you about Utah. Utah is one of the cleanest states I've ever been to, and I've been through quite a few states. It was gorgeous there, too. If you love being in the great outdoors, this is definitely a place to visit. I probably should warn you now, my Rainbow Warriors. This case will get very graphic when I describe the crime scene. So here's your out if gruesome descriptions of torture and sexual assault might trigger something. Gordon Church was born in Utah, under the sign of Virgo on September 14, 1960. He was born into a very devout Mormon family. I was thinking it must be so difficult growing up in a real religious family and knowing that you don't fit the mold of what your family's religious beliefs are. You either hide your true self and fake it the best you can for as long as you can, or you can come out and see what happens. Your family will either disown you, hurt you, or accept you. Or you can run away to try to live your truth away from family and friends. Any way you look at it, all of the options and combinations of options are very scary and stressful. Gordon opted to stay and out himself to his family and live his truth. His family, who were very involved in the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints, were disappointed in Gordon's sexual orientation. But they still loved Gordon very much, and they did their best to put their religion aside enough to love him for who he was and not ostracize him from their family, which I happen to think is huge for someone who came out back in the late 70s, early 80s. On November 22, 1988, Gordon was 28 years old. He was attending Southern Utah State College as a drama major. That particular night, Gordon had some really good friends that he had plans to meet up with for dinner. It was to be an early Thanksgiving dinner for the friends. As the day turned into evening, Gordon hopped into his white '78 Ford Thunderbird, and he was on his way to dinner. He made a quick stop by the 7-Eleven convenience store on the way. He wanted to pick up a pack of smokes. His friends waited for him for 2 hours before they continued on with their dinner plans. They said it was so unlike Gordon to be late or not show without calling someone to let them know. They kept anticipating he was going to be there any minute, and that's why they waited so long for him. Here's what kept Gordon from joining his friends that night. While Gordon was sitting in the 7-Eleven parking lot, a handsome 20-year-old guy came over to Gordon's car and he started chatting with him. The 20-year-old was Lance Wood. Lance asked Gordon if he wanted some company. Gordon said sure. Lance at that point called over his 24-year-old buddy and roommate Michael Archuleta. Both young men got into the car with Gordon. Lance and Michael weren't supposed to be hanging out together, let alone be roommates with one another. Lance and Michael were recent parolees from prison, and being together violated their parole terms. Lance had just served a little over a year for stealing a motorcycle and crashing it. Michael had served time for various drug charges. Yet Lance and Michael, who knew each other in prison, became roomies in Cedar City, Utah. It seemed both of these guys had girlfriends, and the girlfriends lived together in a 2-room apartment. Lance was released first, and he moved in with his girlfriend and her roommate. Then Michael was released, and he moved in with his girlfriend and her roommate and boyfriend. What a coinky-dink that the boyfriend was Lance. That November 22nd evening in 1988, Lance's girlfriend was out of town, and Michael had just had an argument with his girlfriend. So the two young men decided to go blow off steam. They needed a mixer for the bottle of whiskey they were about to indulge upon, and that's what took them to 7-Eleven that night, a 6-pack of Coca-Cola. It's unclear the motive Lance and Michael had for starting a conversation with Gordon. Speculation has it the two men were looking for a mark to roll and rob, or possibly it was because they thought Gordon's car was a sweet ride, and they just wanted to enjoy the ride for a while. Once they did get into Gordon's car, the trio cruised up and down Cedar's Main Street. Lance and Michael were cruising for girls. Gordon was just the driver of the very cool car. The trio did pull over and have a brief chat with a couple of girls they saw before driving to a secluded area at nearby Cedar Canyon. Once they were out of the vehicle, the three men started to partake in the whiskey drinking. An overwhelming sense of honesty came over Gordon as he told his new friends he was gay. And as you probably have guessed, Rainbow Warriors, the news went over like two trans women kissing at a Trump support group. Actually, it was Lance who seemed to be the most horrified by the revelation that Gordon was gay. Michael, on the other hand, bent Gordon over the hood of the Thunderbird, put a condom on his own pecker, and started to anally rape him. He then called over to Lance.
Hey, do you want a part of this action?
But halfway through it, Michael stopped. It's unclear if Lance had said something to make Michael think better of his actions, or what the reason was why Michael stopped. Anger began to fester in both Lance and Michael. Lance started to chase the 5'5", 150-pound Gordon, and Gordon started to run. But Lance caught up to Gordon and he tackled him to the ground. Gordon fell in such a way his arm broke beneath him and his elbow dislocated. The two men stripped Gordon of his clothes. Lance and Michael then dragged Gordon to the trunk of the Thunderbird. When they opened the trunk, they found chains for tires for when it snows and a bungee cord. Swiftly, they bound Gordon with these items and they tossed him inside, slamming the trunk door down on him. They got back inside Gordon's car and drove to another remote area about 2.5 hours north from where they were. This place was called Dog Valley, and it was towards Salt Lake City. On the drive, they discussed what they had to do next. They knew they had to kill Gordon, or he'd rat him out and they'd end up back in prison. Once at Dog Valley, they parked and pulled Gordon out of the trunk. Lance and Michael's initial thought was to electrocute Gordon. They took a pair of car jumper cables. They attached the positive and negative cables of one end to the car's battery. The other set of positive and negative cables they attached to Gordon's testicles. They started to rev Gordon's car in a failed attempt to send electricity into Gordon's body. Being the geniuses that they were, they didn't realize they needed a metal post to ground the electrical current. Flesh doesn't contain that. And those cables clamped tightly. You know it had to be excruciating pain for Gordon. Lance and Michael then took a tire jack and a tire iron from the trunk, and they started to hit Gordon about his face and head. When Gordon was mostly out of it from the beating to his skull, one of the men took the tire iron and forced it 18 inches into Gordon's rectum, puncturing his stomach lining and liver. Gordon fell to the ground and there was no longer any movement from his body. Assuming he was dead, the killers dragged Gordon's body up a hill, and they covered it somewhat with tree branches and dirt. Lance and Michael got back into Gordon's car and continued driving north until they got to Salt Lake City. They stopped at a thrift shop to buy some clothes because theirs was covered in Gordon's blood. The cashier and other workers eyed the men suspiciously. Lance and Michael quickly told the workers they were out rabbit hunting the night before, and that's why they were so dirty. They dumped their blood-soaked clothing in a drainage ditch in Salt Lake City, and then they ditched Gordon's car and hitchhiked back to Cedar City. Lance made a call to his girlfriend when he got back, and he told her the story of the night. He told her he had to tell his parole officer what had happened. The girlfriend called Lance's parole officer and told him to meet Lance at a convenience store. It was imperative Lance speak to him immediately. When the two met up, Lance burst out he witnessed his friend Michael kill a man in Dog Valley the night before. The parole officer led Lance to the Cedar City Police Department. Lance was questioned by detectives. On November 24th, 2 days after Gordon's savage attack and murder, Lance, his probation officer, sheriff from the county Lance and Michael lived in, and Lance's attorney took a trip to Dog Valley and to the site where Gordon was dumped. The authorities found Gordon's naked corpse bound with tire chains, the bungee cord, and a gag on his mouth. They instantly could tell Gordon died a horrendous death. Michael was promptly placed under arrest. Lance was interviewed several more times by the police, and the police were certain that Lance had more to do with Gordon's murder than he was saying. Lance tried to claim he waited in the car while Michael tortured and killed Gordon. What Lance didn't count on was their clothing being found in the Salt Lake City drainage ditch. The blood splattered all over Lance's clothes, and the sneakers he was wearing that night suggested Lance was right there in the heat of the crime. Both men were charged with murder in the first degree, sexual assault, object rape, forcible sexual abuse, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, and possession of a stolen vehicle. A jury found both men guilty. Lance Wood was sentenced to life without parole, and Michael Archuleta was sentenced to death, which he's appealed a couple times only to be denied. When asked why they killed Gordon, Lance and Michael simply said,
Because he was gay.
Why wasn't this murder processed as a hate crime, you might ask? In 1988, there was no such law around, especially in Utah. Matthew Shephard was murdered 10 years later in 1988, and thanks to Matthew's mom fighting for LGBTQ rights, the Matthew Shephard and James Byrd anti-hate crime law came into light in 2009. It was supposed to be a law recognized federally, but in Utah it wasn't until March 5th, 2019, not even 2 years ago, Utah's state Senate approved a bill to criminalize hate crimes based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The bill was signed by Utah's governor on April 2, 2019. It took a while, but our friends in Utah are making great strides for the LGBTQ, or at least for homosexual and bi people. Brigham Young University recently lifted a ban on same-sex dating. Even the Latter-day Saints Church is now baptizing children of gay and bisexuals. Let's face it, we're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere, even in Utah, and the southern states where churches seem to dictate government. Sorry about it. Not really. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.